Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Warlow's Legal YouTube, where we break down complex legal matters into digestible chunks. I'm your host, Samuel Woff, and today I'm in discussion with Harriet Warlow-Shill, the founder of Warlow's Legal, who is also an expert in commercial and domestic construction disputes. Hello Harriet.
Hello Sam, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Our audience certainly will appreciate your insights, especially considering the disturbing data, to come straight to the point, that's coming out of Victoria now at the moment, which shows it takes on average 3 years to resolve a domestic building dispute through VCAT. That's quite unsettling.
Yeah, it is unsettling. The amount of disputes have absolutely exploded, and this has been due to a number of factors, but there have been an increased number of cases coming into VCAT, and this has really placed a strain on resources.
Yeah, and I mean it's obviously the increased number, but it's also that we're seeing an increased complexity in these disputes as opposed to what they might have been in a more bygone era. The disputes in VCAT related to domestic building disputes are quite complex in this day and age.
Yeah, it is true. They've become increasingly complex. In fact, they're as complex as things that you would see in the New South Wales Supreme Court.
Yeah, wow. And so there's not just obviously the, I suppose, the factual and expert evidence complexity that comes with it, but recently, obviously, as well, we've had decisions from the Court of Appeal in Victoria, which have added far more legal complexity and jurisdictional complexity as well.
Yeah, that's right. So the Krongold decision that came out in October last year limited the amount of things that the VCAT can decide on, so the main area where domestic building disputes are heard, and this has thrown VCAT into chaos, and there have been a number of cases since then that have muddied the waters even further.
Yeah, and I suppose the net result of all of that additional complexity is that the scope of what VCAT can actually hear and determine has shrunk significantly. And what happens to those cases if VCAT can't hear them?
So at the moment they seem to be stuck. They notionally are meant to be sent to the county court or the magistrates court. However, they seem to be stuck in VCAT waiting to be moved on. Mostly, there are some that have progressed on, but it's caused chaos and it's caused a backup and of course a significant increase in legal fees, which has got a really negative impact on home owners who are trying to get their building fixed.
Yeah, well, there's obviously the additional administrative legal fees, which just come from just trying to sort out the mess that's there. But then also the county court, if matters are transferred there, is a more expensive jurisdiction as well.
Yes.
And so what that means is that the homeowners essentially are getting a double whammy in terms of an increase in costs on their legal bill.
Yeah.
So you obviously increased costs are in and of itself a concern, but then there's also rippling follow-on effects of legal costs as well in relation to people's willingness to bring legal action at all.
Yes, and this means that at the end of the day, people are facing a terrible choice of either litigating at great expense and much more than what was ever contemplated by VCAT or and for a reason that these are homeowners, they're not businesses, they're not people with a lot of money usually.
No.
It's their home, it's defective, it's expensive to litigate now, it's confusing.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if they don't, then they just have to pay to fix up their defects, and the builders are never really held accountable anymore. So then there's less incentive for builders maybe to build a house that's of standard. Yeah,
absolutely, and that sort of leads to, I mean, obviously not all builders are going to take advantage of that situation, but certainly we don't want to ignore the power of incentives, and if builders know that there's very little chance that they're ultimately going to be held to account for a substandard job, then their incentive to actually do that substandard job and save some costs and make greater profit for themselves in the short term is going to increase.
Yes, absolutely, and we do see that, and so it really is a bit of a crisis situation now, and something that none of the legal community has seen before in terms of a backlog. We're seeing massive backlogs. It's probably taking 3 years on average to get a hearing through VCAT, whereas a couple of years ago it was about 6 months.
Yeah, it's just blown out.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting, obviously, which plays into this is if you look at some of the statistics in relation to how much funding VCAT gets, as opposed to some of the other bodies in Victoria, some of the other courts, even then you can see quite a discrepancy, can't you?
Yeah, it's really startling. So, on average, the Supreme Court of Victoria will receive per case $18,000. So that's to cover the judge, the court, the court officers,
Yeah.
the filing, processing. For VCAT, it's 1,000.
Yeah.
So it's 1/18 of what the Supreme Court has to do effectively the same job.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there'll be some cases, of course, in the Supreme Court which are of the absolute greatest complexity, and they do warrant a greater allocation of public taxpayer funds.
Yes.
But an 18-1 discrepancy just doesn't quite seem supportable, does it, given the complexity of what VCAT has to do?
Yes, especially, you know, there are cases that can run as long in VCAT as they do in the Supreme Court. So there's no real reason why there would be this funding discrepancy, and it has meant that the resources that VCAT can apply to manage caseloads is very, very limited.
Yeah.
And the members and the administration within VCAT are under a lot of pressure, especially with this flooding and then of cases coming up, and then with the jurisdictional issues coming up with Crongold. It's made for a terrible situation at the moment.
Yeah, just a confluence of a number of factors really just playing into it at the moment. And
yeah,
then
that's right. Yeah.
And so obviously we can't allow this situation to persist without doing something. I mean, the word crisis gets thrown around, I think probably too liberally at times, but if anything was going to be a crisis, you would say that from a legal perspective, within that narrow sphere, this really does represent a crisis. And the challenge is, well, what do we do about it? And here at Warlow-Shill, we've given that some thought, haven't we?
Yes, so we've thought about it, and we think that an influx of funding temporarily to VCAT to engage different members of, say, the bar to come and stand in and break this current bottleneck of cases by hearing them all would be a way of clearing the backlog and giving VCAT a chance to get back on its feet, because at the moment it's completely overwhelmed with cases. So if they could have the assistance of the profession to come in, even temporarily, to come in and stand in as members and to stand in and hear the backlog, then one could move forward and have a chance of perhaps reorganising the way that we are all dealing with domestic building disputes.
Yeah, just to give VCAT that breathing space, because you know when you're in a crisis and things continue to happen to you, it can be very hard to just stabilise and stop it and then get back on your feet and sort of identify how to move forward. So having that influx of resources just to help out, no doubt, would be tremendously a benefit to them.
Yeah.
In terms of though, we've obviously, you know, the government recently has cancelled Commonwealth Games because we don't have enough money.
Yeah.
And so money is a big deal in a lot of things. Whilst it's a good investment, where are we going to get the money from in order to be able to fund these sorts of sessional members who can come in to help?
Yes, and I mean, look, I think that one way, obviously, whenever we're talking about justice, is to think about a user pays situation.
Yeah.
So we could have a levy, a special levy on development applications. Now, we all know that you know, developers have had a bit of a rough ride, and I get that, and not all developers or all builders are going to build substandard homes. But at the end of the day, really, it is the developers and the builders that are taking profits from this area, taking a livelihood. So really, it seems to make commercial sense to place a levy potentially on them to share the cost burden of trying to break this bottleneck within VCAT and get our legal system functioning again for domestic homeowners.
That's right, and ultimately, I mean, a functioning legal system benefits everybody, but particularly developers as well, because it means that people have increased confidence to proceed with projects because they know that legal redress is not just some abstract thing, but that can actually be achieved.
Yeah.
And therefore, they'll be more confident to say, yes, go ahead and do a great job. And those developers that do a great job will only benefit from that.
Yeah, it's true. And at the end of the day, without having this sort of assurance that when you build a house, you're going to have a house that's going to last, you're not going to want to build anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're not going to want to buy anything.
Yeah.
So we need it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the legal system is it's the invisible glue that holds everything together. And when it's not working well, then it's a big problem for everybody.
Yes, I
absolutely.
agree.
Well, Harriet, I think that's probably all we have time for today. Thank you so much for coming in to share your views. Once again, this has been Warlow's Legal YouTube. Thanks very much for taking the time to join us. And just a reminder as well that this information is for informational purposes only. It shouldn't be used as legal advice, and you should always get specific legal advice for your own tailored circumstances. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you.